Do agencies hurt churches when they do missions for them instead of with them? When working in the mission field, mission agencies are careful not to do for newly planted churches what God has called them to do themselves. But when relating to established churches who send and support missions, do agencies do missions with them or for them?
This episode of The Mission Table is brought to you through a partnership with 1615 Church Missions Coaching and Avant Ministries. More than 2 billion people still need to hear the gospel. Since 1892, Avant Ministries has focused on planting and developing the church in the unreached areas of the world. Through church planting, church support ministries, media, education, camp and business, we hope to establish churches among the unreached, mature, nationally led churches that desire to plant more churches, first in their own city and then all over the world. Avant trains, sends, and serves missionaries in over 30 countries globally. Avant Ministries, reaching the unreached since 1892.
Watch, reason, and participate. Join us as we consider if mission agencies hurt churches when they do missions for them instead of with them. Welcome to Season 2 of The Mission Table. This season, we are again tackling some of the most critical and controversial topics impacting missions today. And the way we do that at this table is by asking questions. We want to ask questions that move conversation, and our hope is that those conversations then move God's people to action. I'm pleased to have with me Ted Esler, President at Missio Nexus, Dave Hansen, Vice President of Ministry Relations at Avant, Phil Auxier, Lead Pastor at Crestview Bible in Hutchinson, Kansas, Larry Sharp, founder of IBEC Ventures, and Doug Lucas, the founder of Team Expansion. So the question we're going to address today in this episode, gentlemen, is this. Do mission agencies hurt churches when they do missions for them instead of with them? Now, in my experience of working with agencies over the last 20 years, when it comes to field work, mission field work, most of them have learned that you don't want to do ministry in such a way that slights or marginalizes the role of the local church. You know, the day of colonial type missions, they're gone. We want to empower the indigenous, listen to the nationals, quickly raise them up. We don't want to create a spiritual welfare state. So most agencies would say, we don't want to do missions for those people. We want to do missions with them. But something I've noticed on the other side of the mission field, so to speak, so churches in the West, sometimes those very same skills of contextualization, they're not present in their relationships with local churches. So that's how I want to frame this question. Do agencies hurt churches when they do missions for them instead of with them?
For me, this goes all the way back to New Testament times, when that church in Antioch in Acts 11 felt that calling by the Holy Spirit to do something. The Holy Spirit was active and prompted the church to send out a couple of guys. So from the very beginning, it seems like that there was a partnership between the local church, of course, the Holy Spirit doing the empowering, and then these guys were willing to go. Interestingly, in the New Testament times, those guys could change while they were out there in the field. They could go from one city to the next without sending smoke signals back to Antioch. So they had a lot of, I guess you could say, flexibility or leash, but the whole time they were empowered by the local church. And you could tell that when they came back, they spent a long time there reporting. And I'm sure the church was very interested in praying for them the whole time. So it seems to me like that's a great illustration of the fact that it's a partnership.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think what we have to do is also remind ourselves, I'm part of an agency that's over 100 years old. Okay, so when it started, who was the church in North America? What was the size of the North American church? What was its mission's passion? Was it sending out missionaries like you talked about from the book of Acts? No, it really wasn't. So God raised up mission agencies or raised up men to bring into existence mission agencies. Then you move that forward. And so to a certain degree, the church gave to the agencies at that time this kind of responsibility. Not sure what they said about partnership at that time, but most of these churches were small. They weren't mega churches of thousands of people with mission pastors and so forth. So that's how we kind of got to this subject of the church and the agency, and kind of the tension point that exists between the two. And here we are today. I'd say in the last 10 years, there's been that shift going on, and that's why we're talking about this subject today.
Well, I mean, I would take the position that, yeah, agencies have, that for sure, hurt churches by taking the initiative away from churches that are willing and able and wanting. Now, that has to be balanced with the fact that there are churches that, frankly, don't have the capacity, the means, the vision. I mean, churches are like people. They come in all different shapes and sizes and desires and wants, and et cetera. So I think that there is not only potential, but there's the reality. We've seen it happen. On the other hand, not every church is really able. And like you just introduced, 100 years ago, it was really different. Today, we have churches that are, frankly, larger than a lot of mission agencies. They have the capacity, they have the desire, they have the will, they have the vision. And I say, Lord bless them, let them go. Most of the mission agencies we have grew out of local church ministries. And I think that's going to continue to happen in the future.
So I wonder, what do you think is behind this shift? As you mentioned, 100 years ago, this is not the way churches did missions. They gave money, they sent people, and the agencies took the initiative. There is this paradigm shift of local churches, I think big and small, who are no longer content to just serve and support roles. They want to do missions in a way that is proactive, that engages the gifts of their people. What's behind that shift? I say it's a departure from doing missions by proxy to missions by participation. Any ideas what's behind that shift?
I like to take it back to the real call of God to make disciples is with the individual. It seems to me it's not with the institution, neither the agency or the church. And God has raised up and will continue to raise up institutions in our culture, because we are an institutional culture here. And the church now is beginning to get that. And I think the agency needs to listen and participate in that clearly, or the agency will become redundant. And I think it's good to remember, and you speak of the Church of Antioch, which we all appreciate and value and see as a model. But the church in Antioch, how was it started? It was started by individuals. And so was all the churches there before the so-called missionary movement. And I think that we may be going back to that in some sense. And I think it's good to remember that. So to me, the answer to your question is that the church now is becoming an institution which hopefully will understand the Great Commission and be able to facilitate it like the agency has done in the past. And I'm in favor of that, of course.
We have a ministry, and I'm looking over, of course, and seeing you here, Phil, being a lead pastor at a local church. But Larry, we have a ministry as a part of our organization that seeks specifically to dare local churches to take responsibility for a particular unreached people group or unengaged group somewhere. And we specifically say to them, if an individual that we recruit in this partnership, whether they be from your church or not, if that individual should drop out, remember, it's a speed bump in the project's life. It's definitely a hassle if somebody drops out, but nevertheless, it's a speed bump. The responsibility for reaching this group will rest on this partnership between the org and the church. So although I hear you saying it is sometimes through individuals, I think it can also be through that partnership with the churches. I mean, you see that, don't you, Phil, in your work?
Yeah. And I think part of, the question Matthew's asking is why the shift? And I think part of it is we're understanding at its most foundational level, we have maybe a better understanding of the gospel itself. In these days, it's kind of front and center, especially in large pockets of evangelicalism.
You're saying the church is waking up.
Yeah. I think the cobwebs are shaken out, and we're seeing. That's what's driving a lot of this. Like in my
Great.
So let's not lose sight of just the foundational aspect of the gospel. We don't want to assume that it's when the gospel's recovered in a generation. Think of any epic of church history. When the gospel's recovered, things radically change and shift. So that's part of it. But I think related to that too is the view of how the gospel impacts the local church is a part of that too. So kind of at the same time, a recovery or belief about what the local church is to do. And so, parachurch exists in a sense because local church isn't doing its job in an area. And so there's the existence of mission agencies. Now the church is seeing, no, we have to go to the nations. It's kind of our task. We've been given this. It's not been relegated to the experts. It's been given to us in local expressions. And so therefore, what do we do with this? And so like in my case, my church isn't a mega church. It's just a group of people that are together, central part of the country, Midwest. And we're, if we were going to send somebody to the field, we would need the help of an agency. We don't have like a missions wing of the church that we could call. And I mean, that'd be fabulous if we had that. But no, we would call the agency and say, we need your help. We have candidates, how can we assess them? How do we, we want to go to this part of the world. Is that a part of the world that you're interested in working in? And there'd have to be some collaboration take place. But those are some thoughts as to why the shift. I think the gospel, yeah.
I mean, I agree completely. I also think that we are embracing the idea of the priesthood of the believer more than ever. I would say one of the reasons for the shift is globalization.
Yeah.
I mean, I went out to, the Balkans back 20, 25 years ago, and I didn't know anybody that had visited the Balkans hardly at all. Today, I run into people all the time. Oh, been there, enjoyed the coast of Croatia, did this, did that. Travel is much more abundant. It's cheaper. Of course, you got the whole short-term boom that's happened. All of those things, I think, are contributing to people saying, well, why aren't we more directly involved than we have been?
I would also say on the agency side that you're seeing within the agency family leadership that has been on the church side. In my case, I chaired a missions committee of a mega church for over 17 years. I understood the gap that existed because I was living it out on the church side. Then I joined the Avant, or part of an agency. So my number one goal was to bring the church and the agency together. Every meeting I sat in as part of the executive team, it's like, okay, what does the church think about this? Have we talked to the church and things like that? And I think you see that shift happening within the agencies, that there are men on the leadership team who understand the church side that maybe before they were all just pure missionaries and didn't understand all the church side.
Matthew, go ahead.
That's a great point. I was going to say, in my experience of working with agencies over the last 10, 15 years, I'm just thrilled to see more and more agency leaders who have a high view of the local church. They don't view the church as an ATM or a means to their end. They view the local church as a partner. And I love that.
I was thinking, we talked in previous episodes about the cycles that we sometimes see. And maybe this is somewhat cyclical as well, because now we actually have mega churches coming to us and saying, we've tried to do this by ourselves.
Yeah.
And you know what? We had some good times, but we had some colossal failures.
Yeah.
You know what we decided to do? From now on, everybody who goes out from our church is going to go through an agency. Can we establish a relationship with you, maybe get to know you well, and maybe we can have that relationship where we'll send them to you first and see if it works. So in other words, it's almost come back around.
Yeah.
And in the same way they might consult with an architect to design a building, doesn't mean they're less of a church because they rely on an architect to help them design a building. They're consulting with a mission agency to design an outreach.
Yeah, that's good.
Well, one of the things that might be helpful is and I see this starting, is for the church and the agency to determine what value they contribute and what that. And I think we've started to experiment with that, and we listed 27 things that the agency that I have been connected with contributes to this, and those are all documented. And maybe as we pull those out, maybe monetize those, that the person wouldn't have to join the agency, but there could be a partnership with the church, that the church says, well, we can really do well with member care, but I doubt if they can do well with security. And I've flown people out of countries, cost $100,000, and I know how to do that. I've done that a lot. But the church says, okay, I'll buy that from the agency because of your experience. And there's lots of other things as well. And that brings the church into it because they have a lot of value as well. Right.
I think another side, at least in our case, we're trying to drive that home to the missionary. So when we have new missionaries coming to candidate orientation, I do a whole session in which I ask part of the group to list all the things that they think the local church does for them as a future missionary. Then I want them to list all the things that they think that the agency does for them as a future missionary. And then I say, okay, which of these cross?
Yeah.
You can have a list on both sides, and only really about 10 or 12 out of maybe 24 actually cross where both an agency and a church are doing the same things. So I say, so which page should we take out? Do you want us to remove the church? Do you want us to remove the agency? So I'm trying to drive home right into the heart of the missionary, the importance of the local church, because sometimes, to be really honest, the missionary doesn't even get the importance of that local church in their whole process.
Right.
Let me put the full court press on you guys that work in agencies, because I mean, it sounds all great. Sounds like, we can just take the world together, but
We can.
my experience is I've had a great experience with some of our partners, and so we have international workers connected with Avant, and so I've had a great experience with Dave and their agency. But we also have partners in other parts of the world that I almost get the impression when I contact them like I'm bothering the agency, kind of like just trust us. We know what's going on here. Everything's good. So my guess is there's probably people watching this that have that same kind of experience. So where kind of, if you were talking to agencies, what would you tell them where they need to get with the program and kind of help out the local church? That's what I want.
I would say the number one complaint that I hear, and now that I'm not in an agency, it's been kind of amazing to me in just a few short months how more honest some of these mission pastors have been with me. That the number one complaint that I hear over and over is we're not included in major decisions about our people. And so I think that, to me, is one foundational thing that agencies can really think about.
Yeah.
First of all, there's something in that statement I just made that's really important. That pastor said, our people. And the concept of, the missionary belonging to the church, I think that needs to be really thought through and considered strategically by the mission agencies that seek to develop that relationship.
Right, because, if a church knows its Bible, they know that there's a whole book of the Bible given to them, the book of 3 John or 3 John, whatever you want to say, that a whole book of the Bible that is given to them to help them see the importance of member care, for these workers on the field. 3 John is there so that we take care of, so that the church takes care of these people that have gone out for the sake of the name. And so if a church takes the Bible seriously, and we want to do that, and then the agency's like hitting a brick wall when we're trying to do that, it's just, it can be very frustrating because we're like, well, we have to obey God, not man. God's given us this, God's seen fit to put this in his word. You're getting in the way of us obeying his word. So that would be one example of where I would see some confirmation, even from scriptures telling me I need to be doing one thing, the agency can be getting in the way of that. So,
what I think really helps is to write the stuff down. We have this one church that has sent out now 19 different workers through our agency, and now lately brought an entire team of 4 new families. And they basically took them through years of training before they got to us. When they come to us, we write down what it is we're doing here. We're basically acting as a facilitation arm or a catalyst or a consulting arm with them. But it is clearly, you hear the term sometimes thrown out, church-based missions, don't you? And I like the idea of it being partnership-based missions. But regardless, if we write it down and sign it as a letter of agreement, then we have something we can go back to.
I was a part of a mega church. I was a missions pastor there for over 10 years, and we experienced this paradigm shift in a major way. We woke up to the Great Commission. I think some of our leaders had been through perspectives, and we said, wow, we have totally missed the nations. We've done good at domestic work and church planning, but there's been no room in our strategy, our global strategy, for the unreached, the least reached. And so we woke up to this. We wanted our people to have more active role. We dismissed the agency. We made a major mistake. I will tell you, I was frustrated. I meet with agency folks constantly. We were a big church, so we were a target. And I'm not trying to be rude here, guys, but they would insult me and then ask me for money. That's what it felt like. And they had the mentality of, give us your money, your people, and we'll take it from
Sort
here.
of patting you on the head.
Right. It's like, but those are our church members. What do you mean you'll take it from here? And it had that intrusion piece. But we were so frustrated by that. We made the mistake. We dismissed the agency, and about 4 years later, we had to come back in with apologies and said, we can't do this. We made a mistake, but we don't want to work in the old capacity. Can we work in partnership? So what I'd like to talk a little bit about is some of the frustrations that agencies are experiencing with this awakening movement of churches that want to take ownership. Because clearly there's some problems that are created when they've done it on their own in a lot of ways, because churches abdicate, and suddenly a church is saying, I want to get in the game here. What type of problems are the agencies encountering?
Yeah, maybe I could just say a word as we get ready to, get the full court press. Is I am in no way wanting to throw the agency under the bus. I mean, I think there's some great help that they can be, and I realize that most churches are full of just selfish people. I mean, I don't know if this is shocking to any of you, but yeah. So I mean, as even church leaders, you give us a couple minutes, we can find a verse and a reason as to why we're doing what we're doing, and it's the best thing ever. I mean, just give us some time, we can figure that out. So I think with this, churches aren't aware of their calling of the Great Commission at times, and so there is some help that agencies need. So, having said that, what kind of encouragement would you bring? What would you tell churches that we need to hear? Yeah.
I would just say this: there's a issue we have in the North American church where we have a class of churches that are large and influential, but they make up a very small part of the overall North American movement. And agencies are being asked to respond predominantly to the loud voices at the top of the food chain, more or less. Yeah. But the vast majority of the body of Christ in the United States and Canada is really down here in the smaller and medium-sized churches. Right. So one challenge that agencies have in working with churches is expectations for every church. They're different.
Yeah.
And so you have to learn how to respond to I just got an email a couple of weeks ago, critical. I wasn't involved in the situation, but critical of a thing that happened from a very large church. And it's all about the paradigm. Look at the paradigm they're using here. Well, I happen to know many small churches would love to see that paradigm in their church, but for that church, it wasn't appropriate. So I think it'd be helpful for churches to realize that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And agencies are having a hard time with the diversity in terms of vision and desire and the things that the local church wants to do.
I would say even one little practical one is we have over 1,000 churches that support Avant missionaries. Well, it's hard to even keep track of who is the player that's making the decisions in that church in reference to missions. Sometimes it's a lay, and it might be for 1 year that person, and then it changes to a different person. In the mega church, it's a little bit easier because mission pastors don't necessarily move every year, but we struggle just trying to figure out all the time, now, who is it that we should contact? Because when the check comes into Avant, it's usually got the treasurer's name on it, not the person who's making the decisions about missions in that local church. And even in a church of your size, it might not even be the pastor. It might be a lay person, and he might fill that role for, let's say, a year, 2 years, and then they switch, and it's like starting all over again and all these kind of things.
I'd like to confirm that. I can't tell you the number of written contracts that I've set up with churches that says what our part is and what their part is, what we will do, and those kinds of things. And we spend all of our time scrambling for these mega churches. But then as just even a year or two goes by, there's a turnover.
Yep.
And nobody picks it up. And so you're really not dealing like you would in business with a contract that is going to be followed through.
Right.
And I'm not saying that we shouldn't do it, but that's a frustration.
Yeah.
And because so many of these decisions break down when there's a lack of communication, it seems like one of the things we're going to have to prioritize more than ever before is making time to communicate. I just called up a church a couple of weeks ago and I said, hey, how about if I just fly in and we start a tradition every Groundhog Day, we'll do an annual planning conference together. And the guy was excited about it. And I thought afterward, unless I would have made time for that, it could have been months when we didn't talk. I flew in, we spent the entire day just brainstorming and dreaming. And now I come away from that church and I feel a much more kinship. I guess, Matthew, you're asking us, what would we say to the local church? I've got to say it to me as well. It's just both of us have to make time to communicate and relate.
I think that's not efficient, but it's effective.
It's true.
And I think this paradigm shift, one of the things that needs to come out of it is a return to life on life ministry. the agency relating to meaningfully to the local church and vice versa. I think that is absolutely required.
Yeah, could we say a word too? I mean, what do you guys see with people that local churches are sending you? I mean, could you encourage local churches? So maybe this is me saying, I think part of our mess is we can do a better job of sending you people that are already living in a sense as missionaries here. You understand what I'm driving at?
Disciples
Right.
who are
So
living-
what would kind of your charge be to local churches that just say, we want to create a culture that promotes this kind of person that could go to the field? What would your weigh in as agencies be to local churches?
Great question, Phil.
I would say you should feel free to say no to people. I think a lot of times the vision is driven by the individual who feels the call. And the agency gets in trouble because the church finds out that this person is engaging the agency. And then the church is upset with the agency because, hey, listen, I haven't even talked to this person and you're already in it. Well, that's the person taking the initiative there. And I would just say churches, as they evaluate their own people, should feel really okay to say no or not now. And let's spend a little bit more time working through some of these issues and not let the system kind of just jump over them in the process.
Yeah. As you well know, Phil, we have a conference every year, the CAN Conference Church Agency Now. And one of the things that we promote is at the local church building an internship program. And we kind of try to give local churches all the tools necessary for them to build within people the things that they can do while they are part of your church in your city to kind of reach that quality that we're talking about as far as a missionary. I don't know how many churches over 8 years of doing this have actually done it, even though we're trying to give the church those tools and some ideas of how they can do it. But the difficulty becomes it's a lot of work on your end then. And we can't really help you much more than that.
Yeah. Well, and in response to kind of that, we kind of had to make a decision that we are going to discipline our time so that every month children are engaged when it comes to the nations. Yeah. And it was because of that charge from you.
There you go.
There's fruit. So, I mean, at least one of us is trying to do something, right? So it's all not in vain, brother. We had to choose that, of all the things we could do on a Sunday morning, we're going to choose that one time a month, we are going to devote a chunk of time to put the nations before our kids. And we don't know what the fruit's going to be from that, but
I want to hit on something. Go ahead, Larry.
Just quick, in my response to your question would be, I dream of the day when every local church in America will contact us first, us being the agency, and say, we have a young couple here that's really served our church well, is on fire for the gospel, and we wonder if your agency could help us get them to the nation.
Yeah.
I dream of that.
Wow.
I want to speak about something that I think is very relevant to this question. And you're a senior leader in your church, and you're bought in, so it's working. And you mentioned the fact that you've got a lone missionary connects with the agency, the church leadership's unaware of it. I think one of the most critical ingredients of a local church really becoming a strong missions church is leadership, buy-in, and participation. So what I would say to the local church, if I can put on my agency hat for a minute, if you want an active role in the Great Commission, if you want to engage in a meaningful way, how do your leaders feel about it? If it's just a couple of people, some marginalized missions committee people in your church, it's not going to work, because the agency needs to know that's a good investment of our time and resources. And you talked about the changing of overturn in people, and the documents fall by the wayside, because there's turnover, you mentioned as well. I think the way you deal with that is there has to be buy-in for a global gospel vision that is not just one or two people, but there is a number of key church leaders that own it. So, if I was in the agency world as a traditional mission agency, Avant, Pioneers, others, Team Expansion, and a church said, hey, we want to engage meaningfully, one of the first questions I would ask is your leadership on board?
It's a great point, man.
Are they bought in?
I'm thinking about a recent appointment we had with the local church. We presented the strategy of the church and the agency partnering together to adopt, so to speak, to select an unreached people group to go reach. The missions team, the global outreach people completely bought into it. Yep. The lay people bought into it. It looked like we had a real vision. We wrote it all up. Everything was gung ho. And a few months later, I started getting this pushback, and I called them up and said, well, the pastor has decided we're not going to do that.
That's right.
So you're exactly right. There can be a leader who can kind of squeeze this and strangle it if they're not all on board. You're exactly right.
And it won't fix all the problems, but you talk about the documents that were good one year and now they're irrelevant. You talk about the turnover. If you had the buy-in and voice, and I would even say blood, so to speak, of those leaders, they bled into that vision, you can have turnover and those type of things, and hopefully it will remain.
And I'm returning to a previous topic, but we would be remiss to have this discussion and not talk about one other issue that I hear from mission pastors that I think is a really important one. I mentioned the fact that they feel like decisions are made without their involvement. The other piece I hear a lot about is a lack of accountability exercised on the field by the mission agency for what the missionary is doing day in and day out. And it gets particularly acute when the church visits the field and sees firsthand mismanagement, lack of defined objectives, lack of defined goals, et cetera. I mean, I'm not saying that's epidemic and that all agencies are having that problem, but I do think that's the impression that many mission pastors have about what's going on in field work. And so transparency about that process could be really helpful, and engaging the church, not just on major decisions, but also in regular ongoing checkups in the area of accountability toward mission goals, toward what's trying to be accomplished out there on the field.
Yeah, one thing I was going to throw out too, that if I could just encourage mission agencies, I would tell you, when you get a chance to address a local church, don't assume the gospel. Don't assume that when you walk into the situation that this church gets it. Help them see why the gospel demands that every tribe and tongue and nation must know this message, because churches don't get it. I mean, we would not deny that in creed, but we don't believe it in the heart. That's why it's not happening. So when you have your mission conferences and they invite you to come in to be the speaker, just go back to the basics and say, this is what the mission is. And, not necessarily, Matthew 28, but say the gospel demands that everyone, including, the people that, you may not like politically or whatever situation's relevant at the time, that the gospel's for those, just this morning I was reading just how messed up all these 2 Corinthians 6, such were some of you, but you were washed, you were sanctified, it's clear mission. That's what it's about. No matter where we go in the world, there's these sinners that need the gospel. They need to be washed. They need to be sanctified. They need to be freed from themselves. So
we need to have a song raising in the background. One of the texts.
You want a pulpit?
Yes.
I think that's a very important point.
Yeah.
And you started off by saying you wanted to encourage us with that. Actually, that's discouraging. To think that all of our mission, that's the task of our missionaries when they're on home ministry, is to educate the church.
Right. No, I think
it's a bit of a reality check.
I'm just saying. I'm saying when you come to give the report, don't just assume that all these people believe I'm there because this is what the gospel demands. I think just add this little caveat that, hey, here's what we're doing, but listen, it's the gospel that's driving us here. Use it as a teaching point so that the local church is being built up in the truth. And then God may bear fruit from that. So do you understand what I'm doing?
I do. It's very good.
And I don't want you to be discouraged, because I think there is an awakening to this happening. But let's just keep beating the drum and see what God can do when the gospel's unleashed more and more in the life of.
Look, we, as followers of Christ, many of us for decades, I'm sure, we need to preach the gospel to ourselves every single day.
Recast the vision.
Recast the vision. Don't assume it. But let's also celebrate. We started talking about this paradigm shift. There is an awakening group of churches. I think it's growing, and they're in love with Christ. They're making sense of the global gospel and the mandate, and that's why this shift is happening. So thank God for the shift. It's proof that the gospel is on the move. Amen?
Amen.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for being a part of this conversation.
Continue the conversation at missiontable.org. This episode of The Mission Table has been sponsored by Encountering the World of Islam, Embracing Muslims with the Love of Christ. Growth Mission, investing in people and organizations to maximize kingdom growth. And in partnership with Avant Ministries, reaching the unreached since 1892. And 1615, Church Missions Coaching.